Delighted to have Sven Lardon joining me today. He's in charge of digital audio strategy, or one of the team that's looking at digital audio strategy for VRT in Belgium. And they are, in my view, from everything I've seen from you guys, Sven, you're very much at the cutting edge of thinking about the strategy for the future of the business of radio and audio. And perhaps it's going to be called something different at some point in the future. You'll know better than me. But what I want to hear from you, Sven, you've done so much work. You guys are so focused, so intently focused on how our business, if we're in radio or in audio, is changing and growing and evolving. Tell me about the experience that you're having right now, the research that you're doing, the outcomes that you're working with. What do you think about it, the future?
Yeah. Okay. Glad to be here, Omar, in this call. When I started at VRT about 22 years ago, I think now, it was really a broadcast industry. I'm going to talk about that later, which, of course, broadcasted towards an audience. But I felt, and I was an audience researcher when I entered the company, that thinking from a user's perspective was low, very low. So we were merely thinking also strategically about our brands and our radio live flows and how to position them. And that kept going for several years. Also, when digital came up and apps appeared and stuff like that, the real thinking, the strategic thinking, was a broadcast mindset. And you can be very strategically good, but when you at some point in history, in recent history, that broadcast thinking, research shows that isn't enough anymore. So what we a couple of years ago, we find out, and I worked at radio at that point, at the radio department as a strategic, as a strategist. We saw that when we looked at young generations, how they consumed live radio, but also how they consumed the emerging podcast reality, they weren't thinking broadcast anymore, which we were. And it was, especially for people working in the broadcast industry, a little bit hard to accept and to understand. But we talk about a YouTube generation who their starting point is not broadcast. They don't even have the notion of what that is. Their notion in consuming also live radio, but also podcast or video, which in their minds is hybrid. It's only broadcast industry people who make the difference between audio and video in that terms. We have audio days and video days, but users don't think that way. We saw that the starting point of their decision was not this is broadcasted at that point by that broadcaster, but the starting point in their decision was their selves and their context and their interests. And it maybe sound logical, but the production process in which we are, the way we present in a digital world with DAB+ and with our radio apps, presented our content to the user was not fit to that change, important change in what young audiences think when they think about media. And I heard a sentence a couple of weeks ago in some research, and a young guy, 25, I think he was. It's when you think about media, what do you? And he thought, you talk about social media. He wasn't referring to radio. He wasn't referring to television. He was referring to people, to influencers, to ideas, to moments, to contexts, to shareability, to interactivity. So that's a very big change. So a couple of years ago, within our company, within our radio company, but we are a television and a radio company. So within the radio department, we start thinking about how to deal with that reality, and we called it no broadcast reality. We started to have another starting point, and our starting point in our strategic mind was no broadcast. So in programming, you have to go from an analog or a broadcast programming to a digital programming. When looking at an asset, you don't have a radio show, you don't have a radio flow, you don't have a podcast as a derivative of you have an asset which stands by itself. And a digital asset is, of course, content, but impact of a digital asset is not only the content, which is very important, of course, but is the distribution and the findability, the discoverability of that digital asset. It has to do with visuals, it has to do with metadata, it has to do with a good focus of that digital asset toward content. What do I want to tell, and to whom I want to tell it? So focus on the target group is very important. So a lot of insights there. What we also learned was that our touch points were also um, derived from our brands, our traditional linear broadcast brands. You have Studio Brussels as a young brand, radio brand. Well, you have the Studio Brussels app. And the podcasts of Studio Brussels, you only find them in the Studio Brussels app. But a young consumer doesn't think about Studio Brussels. He doesn't think about a Studio Brussels podcast. He thinks about, hey, Michelle has something to tell about the Beatles. How can I find that? And our discovery paths were mainly built from our traditional brand. So we reversed that. And I always call it a little bit like synchronicity. At the same point, our CEO, our new CEO, we were losing digital audiences, we were losing young audiences. Got in touch with the practice that we were doing, like the no broadcast thinking, and it kind of merged together. Things are happening at different spaces in your broadcast environment or in your company, so it came together, and we had a strong digital plan and said, okay, we're not going to think in this house of brands, which we were, but we are going to a branded house, which VRT in a new digital world will be simplified, starting from the no broadcast mentality. So we started, it's also recent, in VRT News, we had that as a news digital environment, which is very strong in Belgium. But we didn't have that for audio video. It were all separate touch points, a lot of them. And you don't want to take away a touch point from a radio team from which brand. They're all, so it's a big change. But we decided, next to VRT News, which is our news and information channel, to go for VRT Max, is it called, which brings together, and not only brings together, but I'm going to talk about that later, it brings together all audio and all video throughout the whole of the organization, be it live radio, live TV, but also on-demand video, on-demand audio, videos, short fragments, all there is in one environment. Because you bring that together in one environment, which is user-based, or we try to make it user-based, the strategic decisions by thinking from a brand perspective, instead of you triggered that. You go there. You cannot be there as a. It cannot be a box of all your brands together next to one another. No, you have to tell a story at that platform. And telling a story in a digital world is a completely other story than a story that is derived from a big brand, a traditional radio brand. So we're in the midst of that change, and we also had organizational impact. We decided to create a new department, which is called Connection. It has to, the mission of Connection is to connect the content of our brands, because we all still have brands, to the new world of the user needs in a digital environment, which is based on context, on mood, on interest, on shared friends, on personalities, but no longer on program titles, on flows and stuff like that. So we're in the middle of that. Having a platform which brings those logics together, which is also efficient, because we market only VRT Max. We don't market Radio 1 app, Radio 2 app, Studio Brussels app, Clara app. So it's an efficient way in marketing, but also it helps audio people in a broadcast industry. We're also the little brother audio in a company which combines TV and radio. There are also less means going to radio. There's a lot of frustration, and But because you set a podcast next to the live TV show yesterday night, the prominence of audio within your company grows. So people say,
Mm.
"Oh, okay, that we have there not." And for a user, for young users, it's the reality. They
Mm.
don't ask questions.
So there's no hierarchy of content. That particular show that broadcast in prime time on television dominates the VRT Max, and the audio stuff is down in the bottom in a different category. You don't have that. You
No,
just have content. You say
yeah,
this is the
which was a
content.
struggle. Which was a struggle because
Okay.
we built VRT Max from a video platform, VRT Nu, and then entered audio. But now, and that's what I can stress on strategically, we now have this VRT Max editing staff or team, which defends the 50/50 view audio video. So you have to push it, of course, in that way, but also algorithmically, when we see that people are fan of a certain live radio stream in the morning time, we know that we can serve them also audio, but we can serve them also video, which is related in contently to the brand that they're listening to. So you get in a different playing field where you see people as consumers of content in different moods, interests, and that can be video or audio, and you try to mix them together. And we see that by doing that, there are not less viewers for our content, video content, and there are no less listeners for our audio content, nor live nor on demand. So, but we have a different pattern. We don't think in this is the Canvas viewer, which is a brand, TV brand. No, we think in this is a consumer of that sort of content, be it audio, video, or a mix between the two. And that's a new logic that we try to build. But we see that in young audiences, but also and young, that's about till 45. There is no philosophical barrier. They understand that. They understand that curation, the mix of that curation. It's only a barrier within the organization to say, hey, we're not. They're putting a podcast next to our TV show. So we have to preach that within the organization. We had an own team who only did that, and try to talk about what is really going on in a user's decision process, and your impact is going to be higher when you think from a user perspective than from a brand perspective. So that is something that we did, of course, when and all this context and all this rhythm. Of course, when there is a live show, we now have the greatest dancers of Flanders, which is a shore flow, shiny floor show, very entertaining and live. Of course, or when it's soccer or something. Of course, we push it on VRT Max because we know that people are joined together in that live moment. But it will not be whole of the week in the home banner. And of course, the VRT Max for one person is not the VRT Max for the other person, because personalization and algorithms give you your own experience, which can combine all of those assets together. And that is also a new reality for broadcasters. We get a lot of calls. Hey, my program isn't on the top. No, it isn't for you, but for the people interested in your program, because you are a maker and you have a very you look at everything because you work at VRT. But the people who are interested and saw the first, they will definitely get that on their top bar. So it's also a new reality in presenting your content, and I think that is really really important. Another thing.
So just let me ask this, because you have different brand in the FM environment or in the audio environment, you'd have different brands. I'm just thinking like the old guys, the traditional. You segmented your market and you said these were for 45 plus. This was your brand for musically and content wise for 25 to 34. This was your brand for younger audiences, 18 to 24. When they come onto VRT Max, all of that is subsumed. All the individual brands are gone.
No,
the content sits. Okay.
Yeah, it's a difference. For podcasts, they are gone.
Okay.
Of course, we use our brands when Studio Brussels a rock station, makes a podcast on on a club, the history of a club. Of course, on the radio net, on air, they can say, "Hey, we have Studio Brussels. We have a new podcast. It's called Fuse. It's a club in Brussels. Okay, history of Fuse." When positioning that on VRT Max, there is a big title, History of Fuse. That's the podcast. We don't have a Studio Brussels logo for podcasts. No brand logos, because we also want people who listen to Radio 1 but are interested in the history of Fuse to not have a barrier. This is that brand bringing that cut. So we have a lot of our classical station has a lot of history podcasts. But when it was branded with Clara, it has the Clara, that's not for me. That's for something somebody who's interested in classical music. I will not listen to that podcast. We saw now that the history of Middle Ages in Flanders, a podcast from Clara, by spreading that as a podcast on the history on the Middle Ages and not as a Clara podcast, we also have young people listening to the podcast. So you can enter that. When we talk about live radio, of course, branding of the station is important. You must, it's a live, but within you have live radio and you have podcast. We also talk about atomic radio or near live radio, which are little stones, little building bricks from your life experience, who stands on their own and talk about something like one politician comes in the Radio 1 show and talks about, I don't know, pregnancy leave or mother leave or something like that. And we pull that out as a digital asset. We try to give it the right metadata, the right visual, and pull it out of the brand environment as an asset on itself, and then spread it towards all the people, not who are interested in Radio 1, but all the people who are interested, young mothers, in maternity leave, for example. And so, of course, your branding is very important. The more you go to the live aspect of radio, but when you go towards podcast or to a near live or on-demand audio, the brand gets less important. But the impact of the piece that comes from the brand is much higher when you position it from the content point of view, from the user point of view, than from the brand. So when we monitor data, we don't look, we look at the whole of things. We know there's something, you have touch point brand and content brand. Of course, we know that the asset, the fragment of 5 minutes from a Radio 1 show, we can dedicate that to Radio 1 internally. So we can say to the Radio 1 people, hey, when you put a fragment or an asset and you define it from within your content and your target group and not from within your brand, you have this much listeners, that are your listeners. So we in data, we can show them the impact of not thinking in a broadcast kind of way for content which is consumed on demand. And of course, live radio shows can still have the branding of the live radio show, but it's seeing that people, and especially young people, they don't have the broadcast starting point. So they're never going to look, when you're interested in dogs as pet, you're not going to look to you're not going to search in Google Radio 2 looking for dogs or something. No, you then enter dogs.
Yeah.
And then you have to have good audio and good metadata and video which matches that proposition. And that's what we try to do. That is by having the platform and the curation and from within VRT Connection, we can think brand independently. That helps. What we are not yet at is that the production process is still broadcast. So we filter pieces out of the live radio environment. For podcast, it's starting to get better, but I think we have to make a lot of interesting steps towards a non-linear production process, which builds your linear experience, which builds your on-demand experience, but not the way around. Your linear experience cannot build your on-demand experience, because then you do not start from what the digital user is made of.
How do you measure that you're being successful with this strategy? What are your sort of milestones?
Yeah, impact. So you don't want to lose listeners because you do it the other way around. For example, podcast. We started. We had a podcast strategy, and all our podcasts were in different apps and stuff. But they were podcasts from the brands. So when we started to offer them in a centralized way in one platform, pulled away the main goal was to have more impact. So in our total offer of our podcast had to be higher than it was before the strategic change, and that is what happens. That is what happens when also for live, for example, when you serve certain live radio shows. Um, Not from a traditional way, but hey, you're interested in consume in money, and there's now a show on money on that station, and we that impact of the sum of that curation has to be higher than the traditional audiences that they had. So that is the KPI that you set there.
And you're seeing with this aggregation under VRT Max, you're seeing growth. You're not seeing further fragmentation and decline. You're seeing everything grow. Is that what's happening under VRT
That's
Max?
what's happening in our volume. In our
Yes.
volume now,
Yes.
that's what's happening. The case of the podcast is we're a small country, and podcast is emerging. A year ago, we had about, I think, 1 million plays a month, which is small in podcast with our VRT podcasts. When we started with integrating them in VRT Nu, which was the platform before VRT Max, and then VRT Max, in 1 year's time, our podcast in totally, so also on Spotify and Apple and on VRT Max, went from 1 million to 4 million. So it was, but that's okay. That's because we it's not only and the consumption of the podcast on our own platform went to 5% to 25%. So we had more listeners in total, also on Spotify and Apple, because you position your content also on Spotify from a no broadcast perspective. This is not a Radio 1 podcast, this is the podcast on dogs. Also on Spotify. Of course, on Spotify, we put there a logo VRT Max, which where you choose this is the sender of the message. VRT Max brings you this podcast, which can be a podcast from our Radio 1 or Studio Brussels, don't care, but so we brand that. But we see that we gain also listeners on our own platform, so they're not like when one goes down, the other one goes up. So distribution strategy, we do that carefully.
Yeah.
We must grow with VRT Max now at this point.
And you don't believe in a walled garden. You don't believe that your stuff, your content, your assets, content assets, should only be on VRT Max. You're happy for them to be on Apple. You're happy for them to be on Spotify. That's not an issue for you, even as you think about the future. Because monetization is going to be a problem on the other platforms, right?
Yeah. At this point, we need to gain strength on our own platform. We need to gain awareness on our own platform, because it's not because you enter a platform or you create a new platform that people are going to know it. And so we're in the phase that the awareness isn't big enough. We see that it works. We see that it works for people finding us. But for example, for podcast, having a walled garden and only be exclusive on VRT Max at this point, we will lose a lot of young audiences, which are on Spotify and which are not drawn to VRT as a brand, as a company, because they don't think broadcast, they think content. So in this phase, we don't talk about Spotify. Radio presenters used to talk on air about, hey, you can listen to our playlist on Spotify. We strictly said, no, don't talk about Spotify anymore. Talk about VRT Max, but our offer is still on Spotify. And we have some windows, but very small in this phase. Of course, when VRT Max get bigger and you have the audiences getting to that to that platform, I think gradually it will be good to talk about more windowing, but there are different windowing strategies. I don't believe in a strict walled garden at this point, also not for the coming years. But you have to believe in your own strength. I believe that you can change things. I see that we're now in podcast for our own podcasts, the consumption is bigger on our platform than on Apple.
Okay.
Which is a traditional VRT, but it's a little bit higher educated Apple, so it's easier for us to draw them to a public service platform. Spotify is raising, but you can do that so communication is very important. Only talk about VRT Max. Setting your assets as digital assets with the right visual, with the right metadata, with clear titles, with good baselines, and creating guidelines within your company that because you're on a smartphone, you only have 5 seconds to look at that asset to decide to play it. And focusing on that, the whole of the brand logic is in our head. It's not in the head of the consumer. It is for a live experience, and there it has to be shown. And so gradually, by doing that, you can alter your windowing strategy. But I do it carefully.
To round up, let's talk about two other areas. One, the meshing or merging of audio and visual, and how you think about that in terms of if you are a radio operator, how you think about your strategy as an audio operator, radio operator, and when it comes to combination of audio and visual. And two, I think that you've got also something that you call hybrid.
Yeah.
Let's round up by talking about those two aspects and how you're thinking and dealing with it strategically.
Yeah. First, the audio-video, or the audio and the visual experience. Of course, when you create a platform where both are serviced, you also give the signal to your own producers, to your own radio brands also, to think in both ways, to also be visual. And visual can be a good image, which is not to be underestimated. Imaging is part of the new radio reality, also in the car. It's very, very important. Of course, when there's something happening and you want to see it, you don't have to have doubt to visualize it. So also live radio shows, which can be shown on in a visual aspect, you have to do it for those moments and those contexts which are valuable. And of course, your platform can alter between the two if you want to do that as a user. Also, on the other way around, we see that people are listening in our car to TV programs that were broadcasted the day before. So the context of the user is the most basic thing, and you have to see that your assets are audio proof, but when they deserve it, the context deserves it, and when the content can also be viewed, and you have to serve it too. So that is very important, because I don't believe that we are in 5 years we will talk about radio production. I believe there will be a radio flow production unit, and then there will be an on-demand production unit which combines audio and video. And of course, it has to be context proof. So the audio experience has to be complete without the video, but it has to be the both of them. I think that's where we're going. Or you make choices where audio is really in the lead, and then you can go for audio on. I think but having a platform to serve that, and also to think the other way around, a video that can be listened to. Think YouTube as an audio platform. That helps. Hybrid is very interesting. I think by looking at that from a no broadcast perspective, hybrid is about the bricks that you construct. Now we don't have, or we didn't have any bricks. The only bricks we had was a live flow and some dedicated on-demand shows, which a video show or a podcast, which had their own production strategies and processes. Hybrid is not about broadcasting. Hybrid is about how a user can construct actively or passively with algorithms or manually, can construct their own experience. And so the definition of live Life will be all around all the time. But the definition of life is altering. It's already altered. When I talk to my daughter, 14 years old, and ask her, what is live media for you? She cannot answer me. It's a question of an old man thinking from a broadcast perspective. Life is now. It's what is now. And they construct their own life. Life with an F and a V. And that's where the change is. When we do not service people, our audiences, as a broadcaster, to shape their own life experience, their life experience, then we're gonna be on the side. So those building bricks has to be there, and that is where we now are working to make as many building bricks as there are. Building bricks being short form video, longer videos, aspects from shows, assets there, and all of those bricks have to be on their own, exist on their own. And then we have to look at technology, AI, curation and personalization, but also simplify things and bring those building bricks together to new life experiences. When I drive to my work, my life experience in 3 years will be, hey man, start me with the news today, give me the new release of that song, and then give me a podcast which carries me away, but that's my life experience, and that will be in the now. And hybrid for me is not about it's also technical hybrid and in DAB and cars and stuff like that, but it's about the mentality that we construct life, a live experience. And that live experience, um, of course, when a soccer match, you want to see that as a whole, as a live experience. But in also the whole of the radio experience in 5 years will be a hybrid experience, and that hybrid will start from the decision, passively or actively, of the user, its interests and its context. And you have to alter your production process within your company to be ready for that. What we have in when you look at Spotify, okay, you can say, yeah, but then we're not radio, we're not public service anymore, we're not a radio company anymore. What do we have what is our value in that story? Our value is that we know our audience. And being a broadcaster for that many years within your local environment, people trust you. People trust you to curate. People trust you in your new hybrid live experience that you will have to offer to them. And creating that as a broadcaster, a public or private broadcaster, trying to use the knowledge of your audience, the feel of everyday life, the knowing your country or where you live in, and knowing the building bricks that you have, having the knowledge to put them together in a significant way, and then offering that in a mobile world to your user on one platform, not scattered around, making decisions. You don't have you don't have to do anything, but you can everything, but you can make a choice. This can be a hybrid live experience that is very good for you. There will be our force, and that's I think international third parties can never offer the same granularity, impact, understanding the user than we as traditional broadcasters with all that experience. But you have to change your production process. You have to realize that the impact will not be in the live flow, because people don't think live anymore. People don't think this is now going on somewhere. Oh, I'm missing out of it. No. We are missing out on what people think and construct. And I think having put now the emphasis on the building bricks and the joint platforms, and then making that story to a hybrid life, what is going to happen the next years, I think.
And obviously, a lot of that, just as we finish, a lot of that's going to be in terms of that production flow. You're going to have to be informed by the data that you get around the sorts of content that people are most likely to want, because otherwise it's all infinite. It's impossible to know what do you spend more effort, energy, because all your resources are limited, people, money, all of that.
So I'm a researcher. I'm a researcher.
Yeah.
Last week, We did a statistical analysis, a cluster analysis. I don't know if
Yeah.
you were with that,
Yeah.
but it's a statistical technique on all the data, 6 months data on VRT Max.
Mhm.
So you look at it as without any hypothesis,
Mm.
looking at the data, seeing what people do, and then you can divide that into different focus groups. That is unbelievably rich. So, but we have there also to change how we look at data drivenness. Data drivenness is not reaching your KPIs, is not, oh, we have to have 500,000 people or 400,000 people. Data drivenness must be what is impactful for that user. Does he or she come back? And what patterns do we see? So a dedicated somebody who can read the story in the data is unbelievably important. Not a research department somewhere far away who looks at what is changing in the world is also very important, but on a day-to-day basis, reading the data, growing with your platform, growing with your user, try to challenge. The broadcast mount is constantly coming into our minds. We're gonna that podcast, we're gonna show it then, and that people will listen. No, people don't listen, say the data. Why is that? Understanding that. So you have to have data analysts, but you have data interpreters, people who can tell a story to people who making the content from the data is, for me, not a cold job. It's a very important job. Combined to that new reality. That, of course, is trying to understand that no broadcast reality is also data-driven, but not with impact. Impact is your base, I think. I can preach a lot, but I'm passionate in it because I feel that it is a process getting there, and sometimes I cannot explain it correctly. But what I do know is that young generations do not follow our broadcast thinking anymore.
Yes.
They don't even think about it. They have a large question mark about what are you talking about? What, linear programming? That's not in my mind. Or non-linear. They're all terms that are not concrete.
Sven Lardon, if you have the time every 6 months, it would be great to catch up with you to understand how this project progresses, how it's evolving, what you're learning. Certainly, I know that RedTech's vast global audience would be very keen to learn from the experimentation that you're doing, the research, the development, all of the investment that you're making. Digital audio strategy, you're a member of the digital audio strategy team. You're doing some fascinating work, and thank you for sharing so much of that so freely with us today.
No problem. And sorry for my sometimes it's not a solution yet, but it's a process. So I can only describe the process.
We appreciate how organic this is, and it came across fabulously. So thank you again, Sven Lardon from VRT Belgium.
My pleasure.